Hi all, good evening. Thank you for joining me, Dorothea, on Through an Orthodox Christian Lens. It's July 11th, 2025, but this is my Sunday segment since I'll be out of town this weekend. And so I'm going to share a couple of articles with you, one from Orthodox Christianity and another one from my own article I did in a blog, and something I wrote that I found in a notebook, and I posted also in a blog last week. So let's get started. How a Girl Who Died of Cancer Strengthened My Faith. This is by Alexandra Grippus. It was translated. In 2015, I was diagnosed with cancer. 2 months later, I underwent an operation. With God's help, everything went well. My family prayed for me while a doctor removed my thyroid gland for 4 hours. I should have been happy that the cancer had been detected accidentally at a very early stage, that an examination had been made quickly and an operation had been successful. As the hospital doctor joked just before the operation, "In a few hours, your thyroid gland will become history." But sometimes it happens that after cancer is overcome, a person plunges, if not into depression, then into sadness and melancholy. He begins to pity himself, and indeed, it's not easy to live without your organ. For the rest of your life, you are dependent on hormone pills. This is called replacement therapy. Once a year, you take blood tests for the thyroid hormone. Periodically, the dose of the drug is increased or decreased. Your weight is unstable, and you put on weight very easily. I pitied myself terribly. I can't say that I didn't want to live, but I couldn't feel joy at all. It was painful for my loved ones to look at me. They had no idea how to make me laugh. I even started murmuring against God and the whole world. Why should I bear such a heavy cross? What did I do to deserve this? I worked at the Russian embassy in the United States at the time. I attended St. John the Baptist Orthodox Church, where I met an amazing girl. This story, sad yet edifying, made me stop feeling depressed, look at my life from a different perspective, and try to be grateful to God. It taught me to rejoice in life and strengthened my faith. Knowing the story of that young parishioner, I realized how lukewarm I was, and that I did not know how to thank the Lord, value my relatives, and greet every day with prayer. I would like to share this story with readers. The girl Julia courageously and bravely struggled with cancer. She believed in her strength and a miracle to the last, took communion until her death, always smiled and was always in a good mood. She was only 13 years old, but over such a short time she managed to live a fulfilling, interesting life and cheer people up with her versatile talents. From the age of 3, Julia studied singing. She sang the liturgy by heart from an early age, won competitions, and performed solo with a symphony orchestra. This is not to mention folk dances and ballet, and everything was at a very high level. One day, all the parishioners were given color printouts to read, "Julia needs treatment and an operation. She has a rare type of oncology. Bone cancer." Ooh, that's terrible. There was a photo of a girl with big, beautiful eyes, so radiant and deep that the lack of hair due to chemotherapy did not even spoil the impression. Below was a photo from Julia's past life. Now at a concert, now while dancing, bright and cheerful, buoyant and open. Everyone who saw Julia marveled at how she coped with illness, never complained about anything, and enjoyed life. She answered all questions, that everything was fine and all right. She also shared her plans with others. After her leg amputation, everything would heal. She would have a prosthesis and would learn how to live anew and walk again. Perhaps Yulinka had such a gift from God, fearlessness and willpower, which helped her pass into eternity with dignity. Until her last day, she accepted circumstances with gratitude to the Lord, and would even say that with God nothing happens without a reason. So my illness is needed for something too. When Julia was terminally ill, her brother did not know whether he should go to France alone or not. He was both her brother and friend, so he hesitated, but Julia told him, "You must definitely go. I'll give you my money." Julia always had money. She won contests, performed songs, music, or dances, and as a token of gratitude, people would give her some money. Another girl could have said out of envy, "No way, don't go without me," and it would probably have been difficult to judge her for this. With such a terrible diagnosis, Julia radiated only positive energy, and never during her illness did anyone hear complaints from her or see resentment or depression. Once she even reproached her mother, "Stop worrying and grieving. Do you think it's easy for me to restrain tears and not let them out? But I'm coping." Julia spent 5 months at a cancer hospital in Mexico, where she underwent alternative treatment and chemotherapy. Should I tell you what a cancer hospital is like? Today you have lunch at the same table with your ward mate, and tomorrow that person is gone. I can understand this, and I'll explain why later. Death, pain, and suffering are always present there. Yep. But Julia's ward by no means resembled a funeral home. She listened to music there, mostly Russian folk songs. She read books in French, spoke Russian with her mother, English with her father. Her father's American. And before going to the Mexican hospital, she learned Spanish. No wonder the local doctors admired such a patient. They asked her parents why the girl was so radiant and what her father and mother did to make her that way. Her mother explains that wherever Julia appeared, order and beauty reigned. When the girl entered her hospital ward for the first time, she looked at paintings hanging on the walls and said, "Beautiful." It was important for her, regardless of whether she was ill or not, when everything around was harmonious and cozy. Helinka was born and grew up in love. She was an adorable daughter, and probably this is why she shared her love with others. Julia sang in the church choirs at the churches of St. Barbara of the Greek Orthodox Church and St. Andrew of the Russian Orthodox Church in the city of St. Petersburg in Florida. She had a silvery voice and almost perfect pitch. She had a funny and artistic character, and her mother could hardly cope with her energy. And to add to this, her perfectionism. The girl did not do anything anyhow or a little bit. If she studied singing, she reached great heights, and everyone praised her and said that she was a born singer. If she played the piano, it was the same story. Also with painting, Julia had this approach toward faith too. She prayed and loved her neighbors sincerely. Julia was homeschooled. She was the top of the class student. However, mathematics was not her favorite subject. It was not her element. History, foreign languages, painting, music, and sports, Julia was the first here. After her leg amputation, Julia received communion every Sunday. At first she used a wheelchair, and then she walked on crutches. And one day, the doctor said she had 2 weeks to live. It was just like a shot. Earlier, they had wondered whether Julia, a child, should be told the whole truth. Her mother decided that Julia had the right to know everything as it was. But nevertheless, no one had expected such straightforwardness. Julia did not shed a single tear. She sang, continued to do her work, and played with her beloved Mickey dog. It's touching that the teachers checked her homework after Julia's death because she had done all of her homework for 2 or 3 weeks in advance. Julia was given her last communion about 3 hours before her death, and just before she died, she had said, "I love you all so much. There's no death. We have eternal life." Julia was so endearing to people that parishioners and priests constantly came to her hospital, read prayers, and gave her unction. After her death, someone wrote a poem dedicated to Julia and hung it at the entrance of the church. Although it's blank verse and short, it's very touching. The Princess of Peace and Purity is as pure as white as let me try it again. The Princess of Peace and Purity is as pure as a white snowflake. Wow. What an inspiring story. What an amazing child. And yes, I get teary-eyed because I can relate to this. I can relate to this because my younger son, Christopher, had a brain tumor. And I'm going to share what I wrote. I did an article on, it was for my nonfiction writing workshop class when I was in college from 2014 to 2018, 19. And I'm just going to share the one portion for you about just little portions of it from my story. And then I will get into more detail here. It was called Maternal Moxie, Tenacious Moms of Special Needs Kids. So I'm going to go in here, read this part. When we mothers have the natural tendency to conjure up ideas or thoughts in our minds of what terrible sickness our children could be stricken with before we know what it is. But when we are given the actual name and details of the affliction, it usually isn't quite what we thought, and sometimes it is. On the afternoon of October 29, 2003, the words brain tumor floated in my mind minutes before the nurse practitioner at Madigan Army Hospital in Tacoma, Washington, told my husband and I that our 12-month-old son, Christopher, had a brain tumor. Yet hearing the haunting words come out of her mouth crushed me. My mind went blank and I couldn't speak. My throat closed as tears gathered in my eyes. I became confused and encapsulated in a fog the next few days as we headed to Seattle Children's Hospital and got our son checked in for upcoming brain surgery. Throughout the early stages of our children's illnesses and treatments, we didn't have time to worry about our own health because we focused on caring for our children and facing whatever struggles and difficulties lay ahead. There really wasn't a manual for us to know for us on how to tackle all the difficult and strenuous tasks we would end up performing to help them maintain a sense of some type of normalcy in their lives. These struggles surfaced several times in my caretaking of Christopher after his first and second brain surgeries, in which the neurosurgeons removed 3/4 of the tumor, but could not remove what was left on his brainstem without causing him to lose his life. After the second surgery, Christopher had developed a blood infection, and the nurse practitioner, Kathy, told me I could administer his medication via his PICC line. I protested immediately because of the paralyzing fear that shook me as I thought about the deadly mistakes I'd most certainly make in doing such a dangerous duty that should be reserved to only highly competent nurses. But the nurse insisted that I could do it and backed her confidence in me in the fact that we were a couple of blocks from the hospital living in the Ronald McDonald House, should we need help, and that she had faith in me that I could do it. She had told me she wouldn't have suggested it if she hadn't thought I could do it. This did not give me any feelings of relief or boost my self-confidence, but when she told me it would be better than bringing Christopher into the hospital every day, and what that entailed, I reluctantly accepted my assignment. After one visit from a home nurse that instructed me in administering the medications, I nervously took the reins. I had to inject antibiotics in his PICC line in his arm twice daily for 5 days, with the fear of blowing out his veins or contaminating the tips of the PICC line and medicine plunger. Nevertheless, after the most agonizing and stressful period among a few others, during this serious and difficult time in Christopher's and my lives, I finished giving the medicines. When we went back to the hospital for a blood draw to see if the infection had cleared, which it had, the relief that flooded through my system was an enormous, grateful wave. In the present day, we monitor Christopher through MRI scans every 2 years and checkups on his left eye and how steadily he is growing, the latter being watched because of his 6 weeks of radiation treatment in 2005. This is a picture of my son Christopher when he was during his 6 weeks of radiation therapy in spring 2005, in which he's 2.5 years old. It's one of my favorite pictures of him. He was such a trooper in that. And I want to say it was a very difficult time. As it says, it was diagnosed when he was 12 months, but he had his first surgery November 3rd, 2003, when he was 13 months, actually 13 months old. And so reading that article about that young girl, the 13-year-old girl, really, it always hits me, because we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House for 5 weeks for the first surgery when it first happened. And you're in your own bubble. You're really detached from the regular world at that point. You've gone into a bubble with a bunch of other families that are basically in the same situation as you and your family. So you can relate, and you end up becoming friends with a lot of the mothers, at least I did. And your children play together. You learn about those mothers' children's illnesses, diseases. At the hospital, while waiting to go in a waiting room, I recall talking to, this is at the Children's Hospital in Seattle. I remember talking to a woman there. Her son had heart surgery. It was just a baby, and it apparently had a hole in his heart or something, and some other problems. And it was just her there with her baby, because her husband was back home in Idaho working, and I think her other child was there as well. And so she was doing that all by herself, and that's a lot of stress, I tell you, a lot of stress. And I don't know what happened to her after that. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep in touch with her. But at the McDonald House, we had a community kitchen, so we all would make our food at certain stoves, and use the ovens there in the kitchen, and we would eat there and talk to other families, catch up. And a lot of people who were in businesses would volunteer and come and bring food for us. I know one of them was Southwest Airlines. I can't remember the others, but they had blow up these little inflatable airplanes that they gave to the children. Many. It was great. And then so we stayed there 5 weeks the first time, and then I stayed mostly with just Christopher and I, and then my mother, and then my husband at the time, and my older son Nicholas. They were at home in Spokane when my mom and Christopher went through the 6 weeks of radiation therapy 5 days a week, every morning, as I kind of explained in the blog post. And you get to know some families, and these kids, you see them around, and they're like Julia in a way. They have a very most of the time very much happy, upbeat. They'd be playing, they'd be doing, and I think most of these young kids probably didn't understand exactly what was happening to them, but there were a lot of kids that were bald from chemotherapy, and I saw all this, and you see how the parents are dealing with it. It was very difficult. There was a woman whose daughter was 11. She had, I forget how many tumors in her brain, and she had to go through, I don't recall if she actually had surgery, but she definitely had chemotherapy and radiation. And she also had tumors in her spine. So I think what happened was, she had tumors, I don't know how many, a couple of tumors in her spine. And I think how they dealt with that is they might have tried surgery, but I know they did chemotherapy. And later on, they checked her, every month or so to see if she was cancer-free. And they went back, and she had tumors in her brain. So it had spread from the It gone from the spinal column up to the brain, and there were 5 tumors in her brain. And I remember seeing the parents, the mother and father. I mean, they were just so drained. It was just heartbreaking. And so they took her in for radiation therapy. So she went through a different type of radiation therapy than my son. My son had a kind of more light chemo, radiation. So the rays would come from different areas to different points to hit that brainstem area where the remainder of the tumor was. So it wasn't one of those that was focused only in one spot and just zapping that particular spot like hers was. It was a little bit more hardcore, hers. In any case, my son's was an astrocytoma, and it was benign. It was a benign tumor, but the problem was it was on the brainstem, which made it worse. Because, you couldn't at that time, I don't know what it is now, but this is back in 2005, 2003, 2005, the doctors could not mess with the brainstem without losing the patient. In any case, they did that, came out, looked like it was clear, and then the next month when they checked her, she had 8 more tumors in her brain. That was the last thing I saw. And they looked really drained, very sad, very sad. We said we were sorry because we were leaving. It was time for us to go home. Christopher was done with his treatments. So I can totally relate on how that feels. And the lady speaking is like, what in that article where she says she had the thyroid thing. Well, what did I do to deserve this? I had the total opposite thing, where I felt like I was being punished. God was punishing me. I came back to the faith in my mid-20s, and because I didn't grow up going to church, so the point was that I thought I was kind of an infant in my faith at that time, but I thought that I was being punished because I was such a selfish person. My husband and I were selfish, and God let this happen to our child for us to learn a lesson. Now, I realized it wasn't a punishment. It was a lesson, though. It was a lesson to learn what it's like for letting go and not being selfish, being selfless, and thinking of others, especially other families going through what we went through. And so, September 2020, his tumor just disappeared. And there's long stories about that. Holy oil, the saints praying, all the stuff that's happened. It was amazing. We didn't even expect that. It was just a shock. But in any case, he does go back every 3 years to check to make sure his head's okay because of the radiation. The radiation therapy can produce tumors, brain tumors. So he has to go back and get checked every so often the rest of his life, because he's now 22 years old. So yeah. In any case, I just wanted to share all that with you for the Sunday segment. I hope you got something out of it. I have one last thing to read. I found this in one of my old notebooks, and it was a little thing. I just was stream of consciousness, just writing whatever in the waiting room, and I put it out there last week, and so I'm going to share that really quickly. And this, I'm thinking it might have been 2020 or something, sometime around around that, right before that, or I'm not sure. But anyway, while looking through one of my old spiral notebooks this afternoon, I found this little stream of conscious piece I had written while waiting at the children's hospital with my family for results on my youngest son, Christopher's MRI, results on the remnants of his brain tumor. I'd forgotten I'd written this. Since it was just a spur-of-the-moment thing, I failed to write down the date that I created it. Considering this was a time when I was still married, I'm guessing this note was sometime between 2014 and 2020. I found this very short message somehow touching and visceral, so I decided to share it here with you all, my friends from all over the world. As I wait with my son and husband to be called back to one of the patient rooms, my body is a walking zombie with dopey, I couldn't read what that said, and sleeping waves rolling through me. Christopher waits patiently to find out, as do his dad and I, what his MRI results are. Yellows, oranges, and reds across from us, with an astronaut poising with arms outstretched to take off any minute. A blue sky with wispy clouds frame the silver suit, flaming reds and blues. Makeshift wings stand alert, unfolded and bold at his sides. A blue screen 60 feet across sleeps, displaying no images. Is this a resting mini theater scheduled for future shows? Several images representing flying high, soaring, reaching, transcending illness, challenges, pain, and crossing over to healing, an all-encompassing healing of soul and body. Flying correlates with a sense of spiritual ascendancy, but truly, if I close my eyes, I could fall right to sleep. This volume affects me like never before, and not just takes off the anxious edge, but this time it's created a drowsiness where everything, including me, moves in slow motion, like those running on film that is slowed down and the person's arms and legs rotate like the gears of a clock running out of batteries. Hopefully soon we shall be sitting in the patient room hearing something akin to no change or dissipated remnant. Only God knows. So that's part of our history, my history with my son. Share it with you. I hope you got something out of it. I hope it is beneficial to you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Thanks so much for watching. Please follow and subscribe to my YouTube channel and maybe Rumble channel. Like my videos if you like them. Please share your comments if you have any on this. Thanks so much for watching and for all your support.